Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We're bringing you our show today from Dixie State University, the CEC, and we are in the studios of Southern Utah Live. We are going to be talking about the Washington County Lands Bill today on our program, and the one that was passed in 2009, and the proposed resource management plan to govern it. There are apparently some discrepancies, and county officials and local residents aren't very happy about some of those alternatives. That will be the course of our roundtable discussion with the BLM and county officials in a minute. Right now, we want to get you out on the ground so you can get an idea of the scope of some of the proposals and some of the areas that are the biggest hot buttons in this conversation.
The Omnibus Public Lands Management Act of 2009 was signed into law on March 30th of that same year. The bill designated 2 million acres of wilderness in 9 states, including new wilderness designations in Washington County. The Lands Bill has since been referred to as a potential solution to the contentious issue of creating certainty in public lands policy. For commissioners in Washington County, the uncertainty created by wilderness study areas that had remained in limbo for 3 decades was finally resolved. However, the Lands Bill was only a piece of the puzzle. The Act released some lands in Washington County for access and development, while protecting others through the creation of the Red Cliffs and Beaver Dam Wash National Conservation Areas. But the creation of resource management plans for these areas by the Bureau of Land Management still remained. Drafts for these plans were recently released for public comment, and what the county thought had been resolved already by the Lands Bill seems to be back on the table for further discussion. A discussion that the county feels it was left out of.
Local governments are supposed to be coordinating with BLM and their land management policy because their plans impact us here on the ground. And so we signed a memorandum of understanding with the BLM that said we'd be a part of that process. They had us come in for a few updated meetings, but they all they seemed to brush us off. And then we ended up with this draft that we have right now that we have substantial problems with.
The creation of National Conservation Areas, or NCAs, was done as an alternative to designating further wilderness in the county. But alternatives B, C, and D in the draft RMP propose an inventory of the lands within the NCAs that possess wilderness characteristics.
We were absolved of wilderness in our land bill when it was passed. It said Washington County's been studied enough and not to be managed that way, and so we thought a reference to that point would have been sufficient. We wouldn't have to go through this wilderness characteristics and stuff anymore. So that was really disappointing to us. Another issue is grazing. We indicated, if there's any discussion about restricting or doing anything with grazing, we wouldn't even introduce the bill. And so they put language in there specifically that said, this is the standard language that allows grazing to continue if there's been grazing there in the past. When our draft comes out, we've got 3 alternatives. One of them is to eliminate grazing. Another one is to take a 20-year average of what the actual grazing has been. And the other alternative was to take just a 40% utilization on your grass. So that means if you got a grass plant that's 10 inches tall, you just use the top 4 inches of that plant.
One of the other major issues that Washington County was trying to resolve through the congressional processes they went through, and that was getting the Department of Interior to designate a route for what we call the Northern Corridor. And the reason the Northern Corridor is so important to Washington County is it allows us to get our traffic from east to west.
Prior to becoming NCAs, these areas had been managed under Habitat Conservation Plans, or HCPs, as critical habitat for the endangered desert tortoise.
We started out with the Habitat Conservation Plan in 1996 is when it was actually signed. And then we went forward with that. Part of the objective of the HCP was to get the area to become a National Conservation Area, or NCA.
For now, what had been held as a tool for creating finality in planning for publicly managed lands seems to have been reset in Washington County, leaving local officials in a position where they must trust that agreements that were made in the Public Lands Bill will carry over into the final resource management plan.
It's one of those things where a relationship of trust is kind of under stress with us in the local BLM office, and we would like to hope that they understand our concerns and they're willing to work with us. They have given us some verbal indication that they appreciate our concerns and recognize them, but time will tell.
For the county seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Keeping that image in mind, we'll be right back and we'll get into the conversation.
There are a couple great things about the Uinta Basin. One is it's still small, it's community. It makes you feel like when you go somewhere, you know everybody. When you know your neighbor knows you, and you can trust each other. People look out for one another.
I grew up in the Uinta Basin, and I think that it's a good place to raise a family.
So we packed up our 3 kids, and here we came to Uinta County, and what a great place it was.
It's not too big, it's not too small.
And it has a lot to offer that you just don't get in the big city anymore.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're going to continue our conversation about the proposed resource management plan that is coming forth out of the Washington County area. And joining us for a panel discussion is Eric Clarke from the Washington County Attorney's Office. Hello, Eric, down there at the end of the table. Commissioner Alan Gardner from Washington County, and Brian Tritle, who is the field manager of the St. George Field Office of the BLM. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. We've kind of gone over so far just a little bit of what the omnibus bill was about for people who didn't know the process, and the fact that there was to be a plan coming forward, a resource management plan to help implement it. So what I would like to start with is to find out what the expectations were from the BLM and from Washington County about the lands bill and what it was supposed to do or set the stage for.
I guess first off, I'd just like to say thanks to Brian for being here. He arrived new on the scene just as the draft management plan was released and had absolutely nothing to do with putting it together. So he's kind of in a unique situation, and so we appreciate working with him and the efforts that he's made since he's been here. A lot of the expectations that we had in the plan itself relate clear back to the starting of our habitat conservation plan and the effort that went forth in getting that put together, which was about a 5-year process. And there were particular things that were developed in there as far as resource use, the main feed for the utilities for our county as far as the electricity comes down through the center of the Red Cliffs NCA, and there were things outlined in there that allowed for the maintenance of those utility lines and new utility lines that may have to be developed, and that's also the case for water. The basic outline of the NCA lies over the top of our Navajo sandstone aquifer, which is a major part of our water and the best water we have in the county. And it also allowed for the maintenance of those wells and new wells and water lines, whatever, you know. There was a protocol set up for that. And the lands bill allowed, there was specific language that said the management and things could be lifted from the lands bill and incorporated into the planning for the NCA. That was, you know, put in there specifically so that could happen. And that's one thing that we were anticipating would happen, particularly with the water.
So you felt there was a sense of finality about the bill that you could count on for future planning as things went forward. Is that, and that the things you discussed would be rolled over into the management
yes,
plan?
We knew up front that there was going to have to be a planning process, but this allowed, in that planning process, for that the HCP management to be brought right over into the...
So to be consistent with the bill. What was the agency's perspective, Brian?
Well, I think our expectations weren't that dissimilar from those that Alan described. National Conservation Area designation had been discussed in the past, you know, just amongst those that were in charge of administering the Habitat Conservation Plan. So in 2009, when that designation came from the legislation, then it was a matter of, okay, now we need to move forward with those draft resource management plans. And if I could, I would just read the purposes of a national conservation area. These are units of public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management that are congressionally designated to be administered for conservation purposes. BLM is the only agency that manages NCAs within its National Landscape Conservation System, known as National Conservation Lands. And NCAs also include national monuments, wilderness and wilderness study areas, national scenic and historic trails, and wild and scenic rivers, just for comparison's sake. And so that's the system of lands of which NCAs are a part, and those are you know, they share purposes with similar lands like those. A little bit more specifically, from the 2009 Lands Bill, there were congressionally defined purposes for these NCAs to conserve, protect, and enhance for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations the ecological, scenic, wildlife, recreational, cultural, historical, natural, educational, and scientific resources of the National Conservation Area. And so that gave us the purpose for the NCAs, essentially conservation, not unlike the management that was taking place under the Habitat Conservation Plan since 1996, I think was the
that's when it
was the year. So pretty good alignment there of purposes.
The expectations aren't all that different at this point, but in the implementation there have been some differences of opinion or some real concerns. So I think we'll delve into that when we come back. We'll take a commercial break. We'll be right back with the county seat.
There is a place where young and old make connections, where kids feel like grown-ups, and grown-ups feel like kids. There is a place where beauty arises in contrast, where wonder is universal, and laughter second nature. There is a place where friends find a future, families find each other, and feelings find their home. There is a place.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are having a conversation today about the Washington County Lands Bill, the new resource management plan proposal, the draft that's out, and some of the differences of opinion about how that looked and what the anticipation of the county was. Let's talk about the changes and the things that you see that are different.
I think it's important for everybody to understand that with the passing of the Lands Bill, the county agreed to have 2 national conservation areas. You know, and those areas covered an area that we'd already designated as a desert reserve and had been managing for more than a decade, as a desert reserve to protect wildlife and other things, and an area that had been designated critical desert tortoise habitat for over 2 decades. And so the county's understanding was that those management plans that were in place and the balance between protecting species and doing all of those things basically met the requirements that Brian read that the NCAs were set aside for. And then we got the plan and were frankly shocked at the drastic change from the status quo of how those lands had been managed to what was being proposed. And just to give, there are several examples, and Commissioner Gardner will bring some out, but just to give one example when it comes to water resources. You know, the status quo, and this is language from the BLM's current plan, from their no action alternative, is that BLM will coordinate with local and state agencies as water protection plans are developed to ensure that federal land management actions or practices do not jeopardize drinking water quality. So right there, their goal is to work with everybody in the area to make sure that our water system stays healthy. And that shifts away from every other alternative is seeking to pursue the acquisition of water rights to limit, specifically do not authorize land uses that would export water uses from the NCA, so to limit the uses of water, and then to go through an inventory and file on any unclaimed water source, with no mention at all of local collaboration or cooperation.
So that means that the federal government would file on the unused water? Is that what I'm understanding?
It says that the BLM obtains water rights on all inventoried point water sources, is the language in the plan. And that's just such a fundamental shift from where we've ever been in our interactions with the BLM and how we manage our water in this desert.
And so this is a section of the plan that that does need some explaining and some work, some collaborative work together on, and we are in the midst of that. I and the BLM fully respect the needs of the communities and residents of Washington County, and understand how hard it is to come by water here. I mean, I live here too. Every employee in my office has at least themselves, and most of them families that live here as well. So fully respect those needs. And you know, this comes down to, for me, saying it is a draft plan and we need to build language into the proposed resource management plan that commits to the obligations we have to work with communities to maintain the water developments that they have. I would describe the intent here as that the BLM wants to have the option of acquiring water rights for conservation purposes, for wildlife uses. We want to have that option, but anything we do related to water rights will take place fully within Utah water laws, and with respect for those obligations that we have to work with communities to maintain their water developments and rights.
Yeah. You know, I think one probably turns out to be one of the biggest issues that comes out, or the cause of the issues, it would be our cooperating agency status. You know, initially we signed an agreement with BLM to be a cooperating agency status, allowing us to be at the table as another government involved in the discussions. And as that went forward, we repeatedly asked to be there. We were there a few times, but not as consistently as we needed to be. And so as these alternatives were developed in here, if we could have been there and, you know, pointed out, hey, you know, this is what we arrived at on our negotiations with our land plan, because we were negotiating with Senator Bennett's office. They were negotiating with the BLM and the environmental communities, and to come up with all of these things. And I don't know how far back down the line that came to BLM. And in the meantime, we've had a lot of people rotate that weren't aware of the negotiation. So it was really done kind of in a vacuum to some of the things that we thought were were coming here, and had we been able to be there, I think it would have made a lot of difference. The condor we were talking earlier is one example on there. They referred to bringing the condor in, but are completely unaware of an agreement we had with Fish and Wildlife Service when the condor was released in the Grand Canyon, that we'd be inside of a 10J area, which is an experimental population, and so, you know, there's just a lot of things like this I think could have been resolved early on had we been able to be in at the table like we thought we were going to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't agree more that the cooperation is just, it's so important. As an executive branch agency, you know, our role in legislation development is extremely limited. And, you know, Alan mentioned BLM was involved with Bennett's office, but of course, those negotiations are happening way above field office, even state office level. We are basically a data source when it comes to development of legislation. So it comes down to, once we have a bill, a legislated bill, implementing it. And that's where that cooperation is so key. Another issue that we have talked a lot about is wilderness. So much of the intent of that 2009 lands bill was centered around establishing or designating wilderness, and the negotiations that were taking place leading up to the bill had to do with, well, there were compromises. You know, there would be lands that would be transferred out of BLM management into local hands, and those things did take place. So there was a lot of compromise built into leading up to the bill, and so our preferred alternative in this plan, for instance, is that we agree we're done with wilderness, but we haven't had the best understanding on why wilderness even shows up in the plan, and that's again where that cooperation is so important.
So, what's your response?
Well, you know, we wonder why it's even mentioned, other than the fact that it said wilderness could say wilderness has been addressed by Congress, so we don't need to look at it anymore. You know, and instead it shows up as a potential for wilderness study areas. And I guess we're really sensitive because of the Beaver Dam Wash NCA. That was kind of a negotiated settlement because the environmental community was pushing hard to have that wilderness. The county didn't want it wilderness. BLM didn't want it wilderness because its habitat for the desert tortoise is be much harder to manage if that was wilderness. And so the agreement was that we would make it a national conservation area, which in our level is right up there next to wilderness. So, you know, we thought we came a long ways to go that far, and then to see wilderness characteristics in the bill or in the draft plan was, and wait a minute, you know, we thought we were through with this word.
We're talking about, in a show that obviously should be an hour, not a half hour, about the Washington County Land Bill and the BLM's draft alternatives for the resource management plan to manage that bill. We'll be right back in a second.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
Planning your next conference or corporate event? The Davis Conference Center offers 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting and exhibit space, plus high-tech audio-visual services that will make your event a success. Whether you're planning a training, meeting, company retreat, wedding, or large convention, let the staff at the Davis Conference Center help you arrange your next event. Located east of I-15 in Layton, call 801-416-8888 or visit davisconferencecenter.com today.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are continuing our discussion, and we're really at the end of the show that we don't have enough time for. So, Eric, I want to give you a chance to, on behalf of the county, just sum up what your big concerns are here.
I think the county has a lot of big concerns. We're very concerned that we negotiated a lands bill and it includes presumptive language that certain things we assumed would just be carried forward into the plan. Utility plants through the Red Cliffs NCA. Grazing would continue on the Beaver Dam wash. Wilderness wouldn't be considered. Any number of things, basic corridor. Recreation. Yeah, thank you. That a northern corridor route would be meaningfully considered at the travel management, which is the next phase in this planning process. And as you read through this, the preferred alternative just doesn't include any of those things. Those were all just, and there's language that says, you know, some new regulations came out, we're just throwing that out the window and moving forward, and that wasn't what we negotiated, and is going to be harmful to the county in the long run.
Right.
Well, and you know, back to some of what we were talking about before, cooperating agency status matters. The facts matter, and those concerns matter. So, you know, it's my job to work with the county and other cooperating agencies to understand what those concerns are, and send them up the chain to the final decision maker on our proposed resource management plans. But I do feel that we have, within this range of alternatives in this draft, room to not throw out the language from the legislation that the county feels we might have been trying to do. So we have decision space to work.
And I'd like to say we have been talking on a regular basis now, and our cooperating agency status is still in place, and we're working hard to try and get these issues worked out.
People are concerned that after expressing their concerns aren't addressed, and that's not me specifically speaking, that's just what people say to me as I travel throughout rural Utah. And
we can echo that. You know, we were asked by the BLM to submit our comments in writing and before this came out as in a cooperating agency role, and we just can't find where our recommendations were addressed at all. We didn't get anything back saying these are the things we're going to consider, these are the changes we're going to make, and we just, I hope that there's some changes that were made, but I haven't been able to find any in the time that I put into it.
Well, and so, you know, I do feel as the local, you know, manager for the BLM, I am a local too at this point, you know, and I plan to be for a while, and so I do care about what those concerns are, like I said before, and want to work to close the gap on a lot of these issues.
Thanks to you on the panel. Thanks to Southern Utah Live, the CEE, and Dixie State University for providing us this really great set. Thanks to you for inviting us into your home. And a final reminder, comment period is open till the 16th of November. So get your comments in, get engaged, read the draft alternatives, study it, and you don't have to be able to make technical comments, but you need to make substantive comments and be part of this process. It can actually change the direction. So thank you for joining us for the County Seat. We'll see you next week. If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4 Utah.